This weekend, Ukrainian forces had a major breakthrough pushing Russia back, retaking more than 1,200 square miles of territory in a counteroffensive that began on Saturday. But here's my question. What does this really mean long term? Does this mean they can actually win the war? And what does that mean? It's great that they're making this progress, but then what? Ukrainian troops have been liberating towns and villages near the country's second largest city of Kharkiv in the northeastern part of the country. Russian troops hastily retreated, leaving behind tanks and ammo. A Ukrainian presidential advisor said the country was running out of places to put prisoners of war who were surrendering. But despite that, retreating Russian forces attacked power stations yesterday. Fire crews raced to put out the flames. Utility workers there had been trying to restore service throughout the day. Ukrainian President Zelensky called Russian troops terrorists on Twitter, saying that they were attacking critical infrastructure and not military facilities and depriving people of light and heat. It seems the gains are being made as a direct result of U.S. aid, with nearly $3 billion announced in weapons last month for Ukraine to defend itself long term. That's great to hear, as the Biden administration announced more aid to the country last week. During a visit to Kiev on Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met with Zelensky and other Ukrainian leaders. He announced more than $2 billion for Ukraine and 17 neighboring countries.
We're proud of the fact that our support, the support of so many other countries, is helping to enable what the Ukrainians are doing and working to liberate territory seized by Russia in this aggression.
DoD announced $675 million in more weapons and training for Ukraine. The U.S. has now sent more than $15 billion to Ukraine since January 2021. It's an enormous amount of money. So it's entirely fair to want to know, what is the end game? Zelensky has said that he wants Russia completely out of Ukraine, including territory Russia seized control of in 2014. Is that realistic? In this country, you have someone on both sides of the political aisle questioning why we're spending so much money there. But the majority of the U.S., what I often call the marginalized moderate majority, support the Ukrainians and their effort, but also want to know what even these big successes mean long term. So let's talk to someone who knows. Joining me now is David Tarfuri, former State Department official and international lawyer who's made several trips to Ukraine since the Russian invasion. He's met with President Zelensky. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. All right, so let me ask you that question. What does this mean for the long term? I mean, how can Americans quantify what victory means, so to speak?
Well, the momentum is on the side of the Ukrainians right now, as you did a very good job of explaining. They've taken back towns near Kharkiv. They're also making progress in the south. Many Russian troops have retreated, and some have surrendered. And the ones that retreated, many of them left their weapons behind. The Ukrainians are going to be able to use many of those weapons, including tanks and armored personnel carriers. So it's going in a very positive way for the Ukrainians. But that doesn't mean things can't change back again, because there's an ebb and flow to this war. It's not going to end soon, probably, even though this could snowball and there could be more territory taken back by the Ukrainians. Putin has said that he's intent on continuing what he calls a special operation. Notably, he's never really defined what the goals of that special operation were. So he has the chance, perhaps, at some point to just declare victory, say he achieved the goals of the special operation, even though he probably didn't, and move back into positions maybe similar to the land and territory that he held before the February 24th invasion. How America might define victory, I think, would be if Ukraine's territorial integrity is intact, if the Russian military has been degraded to the point that it'd be hard for them to launch a new offensive against Ukraine, or also importantly, launch an offensive against NATO allies, including in the Baltic states and other countries in Europe. That would probably be a success for us. But President Zelensky, as you mentioned, defines success a different way. He doesn't want to give up any territory.
That's my question. Should that make us nervous that that's his definition of success, when the U.S. interest in success, as you point out, would be territorial integrity, and Zelensky's saying success from his perspective is only if the Russians are completely out to the pre-2014 lines? Should that make us concerned?
I don't think so, because one of the reasons that President Zelensky has been so successful in rallying the Ukrainian people is because he's been so certain and so clear about what the goals are. And the majority of Ukrainian people don't want to give up any territory. That does not mean, though, that he would not be pragmatic should there be real peace talks where Putin is really at the table and really interested in perhaps resolving this. I do believe he would be pragmatic in that event.
Right, because what the majority of the Ukrainians want may be different from what the majority of Americans would want to happen with all of the money, right?
I think that's right. But remember, as you mentioned, we spent a lot of money in Ukraine, but we also should look at this as avoiding having to fight Russia directly. Which is entirely possible. If Russia were to be successful in Ukraine, they wouldn't stop at Ukraine. They would likely attack a NATO power. As you know, we have an Article 5 duty to defend any other NATO country. It would be a lot more expensive if we had U.S. troops and U.S. aircraft involved in a direct action against Russia.
Yeah, all right. But I think we have to be very clear with the Ukrainians about what success will be. We shall see. David Tarfuri, thank you so much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to NewsNationNow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.